Hi, everyone, and welcome to a very special open class for the first time, a guest other than Michael, which is Michelle.
Hi, everyone. Hey, Daniel. Great to be back.
Thanks so much for being back. And for those of you who didn't catch you, you were a guest in one of the success stories episodes. I think it was like maybe 2 months ago or something like that. And that was a
Mm.
really great episode. A lot of positive. It has helped a lot of people that episode, Michelle. So thank you.
Oh, you're more than welcome. I'm happy to hear that.
So today's a special episode. I actually I'm super happy you're here for many reasons, but one is that I kind of this was on my like wish list for January for this year 2021 to do this open class with someone like yourself who've taken the journey, lived it. And so what we'll do is you'll share some thoughts on a recent episode, and then we have like 3 messages to go over and maybe some live questions too. Sounds good?
Yeah, that sounds great.
All right. Perfect. So we'll start actually with, I think it was earlier this week, I made this episode where I talked about how like thoughts are really like by nature fleeting. It's like they just come and go. And it's really when we try to stop them that they become sticky. And this is such a common question. Like, how can I stop obsessing? How can I convince myself to not, how can I not think about those type of things? And that sparked some thoughts on your end. What did you think?
Yeah, so I watched the recent podcast that you put out about this issue, and as I was watching it, I just thought, "Ugh, yes, this is such a huge issue. I think, especially for people who are dealing with insomnia, it's so hard because even after you learn, okay, like even after you are aware that this is a problem and contributing to the problem, how do you begin to address that issue?" And so it really hit me because this is an area that I struggled with so immensely. And as I mentioned to you, not just with my insomnia, but before insomnia, I was somebody that dealt with anxiety for years. And so, of course, when my insomnia started, it was almost natural for me to fall into having a lot of worrying, having a lot of ruminating thoughts, and a lot of anxiety around the insomnia itself. And for me, it was the biggest challenge in that whole journey for me was facing that and looking for ways to develop almost a skill set to be able to cope with that better and improve that part of it for myself. And it's still an ongoing journey for me. It's these things don't happen overnight, but there were certain things that I found really helpful. So when I heard that episode, I thought, oh, like we should talk about this because it's so hard and it's something I've struggled with for so long. And so when I look back on it, I realized there were about 5 things that I did that really, really helped this whole ruminating thought and anxiety process around insomnia. And the first one was that education piece for me. And we've talked about this before, but in my episode, I talked a lot about how I thought my insomnia was solely a physical problem. And so it prevented me from really looking at the mental health component, the mindset component of it, because I was so stuck in thinking that something was physically wrong. So that was a huge disservice to myself. So learning a little bit more about insomnia, which is really what happened when I landed on your channel, when I eventually read your book and other books that were in that same line of thinking, really allowed me to understand what insomnia is, why, how it's very much about how you're thinking about your sleep, how you're ruminating about your sleep, all the anxiety that goes into it, and how the act of problem solving to solve your insomnia is the problem, and how that then just continues to build all this endless hyper arousal that you have no idea you're building by all of the rumination and problem solving that you're trying to do. So you're just feeding the monster continuously and building all this hyper arousal. So for me, that education piece was first and foremost to allow me to understand that, oh, this is actually playing a really big role with my insomnia, and I can start to shift my attention to that. So that was for me number one, in terms of helping give me that light bulb moment. Number two is changing certain behaviors that I had that were actually really contributing to my own racing thoughts, my own anxiety around my insomnia. And so this involved a bit of doing a self-assessment of, okay, what are things that I'm actually doing that are contributing to this problem. And so for me, for example, I was wearing a Fitbit every single night, so every day. And unlike most people who are tracking fitness, I was primarily using my Fitbit to track sleep because I really wanted to know, how am I sleeping every single night? Are things getting better? Are they getting worse? So often, for years, for close to 5 years, the first thing I would do in the morning was I would get up and I would immediately check my sleep stats. You know, how long did it take me to fall asleep? How many wake ups did I have? How long were those wake ups? You know, how were my stats, my deep, my REM sleep, all this sort of stuff. And I would check it every morning. And subconsciously, that was really putting sleep on a pedestal. And it was almost dictating how my day was going to go. Like, my sleep stats were good, I think subconsciously I thought, okay, I can have a better day. So it was just giving it so much power. So I had to stop immediately doing that. I realized, okay, this sleep tracking for me is a behavior that's contributing to my anxiety, into having rumination and racing thoughts on this issue. So I had to stop wearing my Fitbit. That was the first thing I did. Stop the tracking. That was really helpful. Another thing I used to do when I would wake up first thing in the morning, especially if it was a bad night, is I would launch right into trying to research, like, okay, what's the next supplement I can try? What's the next practitioner I can reach out to work with? Just grasping at some sort of solution. And you can so easily go down like a stress rabbit hole with that type of research. And so I thought, okay, that's a behavior that I'm stuck in. I need to stop doing that. That's not what I want to do first thing in the morning. And it's just contributing to all these anxious thoughts about sleep. So I stopped doing that, and that was really helpful. And then another behavior, I think it's referred to as safety behaviors in CBTi, I'm not sure. Just this idea that if you don't have what you feel is a good night, that you feel like you can't make it through your day. And so you might cancel certain things within your day. Let's say you plan to see friends later that evening. If you had a bad night, you might say, well, no, I need to get through the day, and then I won't have the energy to see my friends. So you end up canceling a lot of parts of your life that are really enjoyable, and would actually ironically help you get over the insomnia. You cancel them. And so I realized I was doing a lot of these safety behaviors. So I told myself, that's done. We can no longer cancel things that are happening in the day, regardless of how bad the night is. If I'm up all night, the day proceeds as planned, so that I can prove to myself that I can get through that, even if I feel awful. And again, helping to take sleep off the pedestal, give it less power. And I didn't realize that my certain behaviors that I was doing was continually putting sleep on that pedestal, giving it all the power, and taking my own ability to cope basically off the pedestal, and contributing to my own powerlessness. So I stopped all of my safety behaviors, and that was also helpful. And then the one last thing was, I started to try to do a consistent morning routine, because it can be really difficult to cope with mornings when you haven't slept. They can be the most difficult time, physically and mentally. So I thought, okay, well, instead of getting up in the morning and I'm no longer checking sleep stats, I'm no longer researching or doing any sort of safety behavior, what do I want to replace that with that's going to set me up for a better day? And for me, that ended up being things like a little bit of meditation, a little bit of movement in the sun. If I could do that, that would be great. And I started listening to motivational content in the morning when I would be getting ready. And I started doing that almost every day. And I found it helped put me in a bit of a better mind space for the day, even though it was subtle. And so that could mean anything, whatever makes you feel uplifted. But I became more conscious about basically the content that I was consuming. And I was intentionally reaching for things that felt inspirational or motivational or uplifting first thing in the morning when I knew I was going to struggle. So those were the key behaviors that I changed, that I found really helpful, either directly or indirectly, to just reduce the rumination, the anxiety, everything that was feeding into the insomnia. Um, and so that's the second one. And the third thing was a really intentional reshift of focus during the day. And I think for me, I became really so overly focused on my insomnia. It became such a huge part of my life. And again, learning that that was actually feeding the insomnia, I realized, oh, I need to intentionally take the attention off of this issue and put it somewhere that feels meaningful for me, and that's going to feel as though I am starting to get my life back in the way that I want to live my life. And so that will be different for everybody. But it was just that intentional shift of focus and putting effort and time into something that feels meaningful to you during the day that was big for me. And then before you know it, you realize you've gone through the whole day. You haven't thought about how tired you are. You haven't thought about how worried you are for coping during the day or getting through the next night. And that's always a nice surprise the first time that happens. So that was something I started doing. And then the next one is the biggest one. And this is something you talk a lot about on your channel. And that is the mindfulness piece. And I think this one, it can be easy to kind of blow by this piece a little bit, but I think it's the most important one. And I love that you talk about it so much on this channel because it's critical. And you talk a lot about how those racing thoughts, the more you push them away, the more you don't want to hear them, the louder they're going to get. And that's really true. I mean, our thoughts want to be heard, our emotions want to be felt. And the more we push all this away, the stronger they become. So for me, starting an intentional mindfulness practice around the insomnia was something I started doing. So I had heard about a mindfulness practice. It was from Peter Crone, who's known as a mind architect, and he works with people on mindset. And he mentioned a mindfulness practice that I started just trying out when it came to my insomnia. And it's essentially what I started doing was sitting down every single day, maybe for 15 or 20 minutes, and writing down, asking myself, what are my thoughts and concerns right now? And I just started writing them down. And you don't have to write them down, but I liked writing them down because it gave that additional piece of distance from my thoughts. And it was a good reminder of, oh, I'm not my thoughts. I'm the person observing my thoughts. They're here on paper, and you can look at them. And for me, it was a reminder also that they are not facts, they are thoughts. So it gave me that automatic space and that distance, but also giving them the time, the space to exist, basically. And then in following this practice, after writing down your concerns, I would ask myself, well, what is the emotion behind these concerns? And what is this emotion asking for? What is it seeking, basically? And so for me, every single day when I would write down all of my different thoughts and concerns around my insomnia, sleep, whatever was going on, for me, it was always things like, how am I going to cope if I don't sleep this week? I have a busy schedule. How am I going to survive this? Will I ever sleep again? This is never going to end. It was all things like that. And when I looked at every single sentence I would write down, all of these concerns that were constantly ruminating, I noticed that the emotion behind all of them was fear. it was always fear. For me, it could be different for everybody, but for me, every single day, the dominant emotion behind every single word was fear. And so then I would ask myself, what is the fear seeking? And I think for any emotion, it is to be felt, to be fully felt. And in the case of fear, maybe to be comforted, as strange as that sounds. So I would feel it. I would just feel the fear of it. And I would try to almost comfort myself a little bit by saying, how this is all scary. This is hard. But right now, in this moment, you're okay. It's okay. And I would just go through a practice like that of basically writing out all of my thoughts and concerns and, um, you know, putting them on paper to get that space, but then asking, what's the emotion behind this? And how can I, what is it asking for? And in every single case, it's always asking to be felt and for you to essentially experience it. And I think with insomnia, it's so painful that we don't want to experience it. We don't want to be present for it. And that's exactly what we need to do. So that's why I loved this daily practice from Peter Crone, and I started doing it every single day. It was just a way for me to reconnect with myself, give all those thoughts and worries space, and connect with the emotion behind them and actually feel the emotion. And then another great side effect of doing that is you end up training your brain a little bit that is the time of day that you are going to do that. So if you, let's say, choose 5 p.m., it gets used to doing that from 5 to 5:20, and it might even give you a break from 1 to 2 a.m. because you've just given all those thoughts and those emotions behind everything that's wrapped up in it. You've given it space, and you've given it your full attention. So that was really helpful for me, and I do it to this day. And I notice if I stop doing it, or if there's a period of time where I'm not really doing any sort of practice like that my anxiety just about general life, not even about sleep anymore, just general things in life will start to increase. And I'll think, oh, it's because I haven't checked in with myself in a while. I haven't sat down and actually given any of this space. So that's always a good indicator for me that I need to check in and sit down and do a practice like that. So I find that's always the hardest piece for people to do. And I think, and for myself included, this was the hardest one, because all the other things I mentioned, the education piece, the changing behaviors, reshifting focus during the day, those are all about taking action. And mindfulness is more about feeling. And I think we all struggle with that. But it's probably the most important piece for anybody dealing with insomnia, or any issues or any anxieties. And then the fifth is, for me, it was relaxation practices. And I'll be really cautious with this one, because not relaxation to make yourself sleep, specifically not that, because I fell into that trap for years as well, doing yoga so I would sleep, meditation so I would sleep. And none of those things help, because they just become another sleep hygiene practice that is creating more hyperarousal. But what I mean is relaxation practices with the intention to just support your nervous system and help move your body out of fight or flight, because that will also help reduce the anxiety and the racing thoughts and everything, since everything is so connected. So any type of relaxation practice with the intention of just releasing some of that stress and shifting that energy and helping your nervous system come out of fight or flight can be really helpful. And so for me, that was things like yoga, acupuncture, hiking, especially if I could be around, forest or water, things like that in nature, that really helped. But kind of asking yourself what feels relaxing to you, and starting to do some of those practices just to support your body and without the intention of forcing yourself to sleep. Completely different.
Wow, it's well put, Michelle. It's really, really super like insightful, like compassionate. It was also practical. Like that's some really good points. And I want to just, there was a few things I wanted to like really comment on, which was maybe number one was like what you said about like having like a consistent morning routine. I thought it's funny how like, there's so much talk about a bedtime routine, which is not very helpful at all, generally speaking, because it becomes that effort again. But having that like, okay, every morning I get up about this time, I do this thing, it kind of like frees you up from so much because you have that routine. I thought that was very, very very insightful. I think that can help a lot of people.
Yeah, and I would even state that for the vast majority of my life, up until probably 6 months ago, my morning routine was sleeping in as much as I could and then rushing like crazy to get out the door on time. Like that was my version of a morning routine. And I would hear about morning routines and I would just think, oh, I would roll my eyes almost and think like, morning routines are for morning people who like the morning. I've never been a morning person. So I just thought, no, this is not for me at all. And now I can't imagine not having one. And I think it's even more helpful for people who struggle with the mornings, actually. So it's the reverse. I think the morning people may not need them as much as
Exactly.
the folks who struggle like me in the morning. And so, to this day, it's really helpful, and it just helps me kind of set myself up for success in terms of my mindset for the day, especially after a bad night, because then you need that extra boost, and and it's going to be different for everybody what they like doing in the morning. But I would encourage people, especially if they're rolling their eyes at the idea of a morning routine, I get it, pick one thing and try it, and you might surprise yourself, and then you might become a morning routine person.
That's right.
Other people rolling their eyes at you.
Go full circle. Yeah,
full circle moment.
exactly.
That's what's happened to me. I'm like, oh, morning routines, like what?
No, that's great. And I think just one last thing before we go over these messages we're going to answer too, which is, kind of like feeding the brain. Like you're feeding the brain like all this tracking information, these percentages, this grasping at straws. And just to share something on a personal note, like as I do this channel, I teach things, and I'm like, I think that applies to me too. And I think I've routinely gone into this pattern of checking a lot of things like, okay, how many subscribers do we have? What channel? What did get a lot of views? Like, oh, how's the app doing? How many new clients do we have? And the thing is that is really unactionable. Like, I can't do anything with that information. It is just feeding the brain stuff that it cannot really process, except in the process of like trying entanglement. Maybe this, maybe it was that, maybe it's that, maybe this, maybe that, right? It's not helpful. So I really thought about that, feeding the brain, like be mindful of what you feed the brain. I think that helps for anything, really.
I couldn't agree more. I think a lot of this stuff too, and I was thinking about it, is really helpful for insomnia, but just really helpful for life in general. And that's what I
100%.
like. Oh, I've started to do certain practices for insomnia, right? With that lens, but then realizing, oh wow, this really extends to my entire life.
To life, yeah, 100%. This is fantastic. I'll just, before we jump into question, I'm just going to say that that's sort of becoming almost what I feel the most gratifying, is not just help people towards like sleeping better, but that what you teach applies to life in general. It's really, really cool.
I couldn't agree more. And I know we touched on it in my original podcast when we were talking about welcoming all the unwelcome feelings and emotions, and feeling sensations and feelings fully, and all this sort of stuff. And the same thing with not pushing away those thoughts, letting them in, giving them space, observing them. I mean, that's really impactful for every part of your life. That will change your life, and that has changed my life, because even though insomnia was kind of the gateway for a lot of these concepts and applying them, I've started to apply them across the board, and I can really kind of see and feel the impact. Definitely.
Perfect. Okay, well, that was a strong opening here. Set us up for answering some questions here. And the first one, let's take a look here. We have a first question is from Judy. Let's read this. Hi, Daniel. I would like to ask for advice. Since I started CBT, I find it hard to sleep in other places like hotels and other houses. It seems like my mind has been controlled. Like I can only sleep in my own bed. What can I do about it? I get used to sleep in our house with my sister and cousins, but when I tried having a vacation, I just can't sleep in that hotel. So I'll first say, Judy, that this is very, very common, and actually, I find this actually very encouraging. What a Pat and I all very often see is that someone starts kind of learning about sleep and implementing some habit changes, and then start doing better in their home environment, and be like, okay, this is pretty good. But when there's some kind of change, you're going elsewhere, you're going for a trip, then you have trouble sleeping, and you're a little bit things are a little bit different. And I would say the first thing I want to say is that it's completely normal and expected because, as Michelle pointed out earlier, it's really all about fear. Like when you have insomnia, it's this, the brain is a little confused and it started to being fearful of being awake at night. And now you're teaching it that it is really nothing to be afraid of. But then when there's some kind of change, I'm going to sleep elsewhere. Then of course the brain goes, but how about that? That's that's a little triggering, and so the first thing is that nothing strange or unusual, or this is completely expected. It's part of the process, really. And to get more practical, what are my thoughts on, okay, what can you do? That will be things like, first of all, understanding, which you're already doing. Then it's always very tempting when you're going to sleep in a hotel, let's say, so like it's going to be in 2 weeks. Then you're like, okay, I'm going to really plan out to do something so I can sleep in 2 weeks. But that's not helpful because you can't make yourself sleep. So like preparing and trying to prevent not sleeping well in that hotel actually will make you more preoccupied and you have more trouble when you're in the hotel. And then perhaps thirdly here, I think this is the last thing I'm going to say before I let Michelle comment is, try not to, don't cancel events. What often happens is somebody is like, I'm not going to go to that trip because I'm not going to sleep. But then it just seems like you're kind of teaching your brain that, again, insomnia has power over you and it dictates what you can and cannot do. So it's much more helpful to be willing to have that night where you don't sleep so much in the hotel, but then still go on and enjoy the rest of it. And then you're showing yourself that, oh, insomnia doesn't dictate what I do, and I can do well even if I didn't sleep much that night. I did okay. I did it. And then over time, you're teaching the brain that there's nothing to be afraid of, really, even when you're traveling or outside of your bed, etc. So those are my thoughts. What do you think, Michelle?
I agree with all of that. And hearing this, I have so much empathy for it because I used to travel a lot for my career, and I used to struggle immensely being able to sleep in hotels. And this was before I even started my insomnia. So I understand how difficult that can be for sure. But you're absolutely right. I mean, the brain is just trying to keep you safe, right? Especially if you've been dealing with insomnia and you're finally sleeping better in your own house. Of course, the moment you change that environment, your brain is going to kind of freak out a little bit, and it's going to enhance the hyperarousal. And I think part of it is just understanding why that's happening. Your brain is just trying to keep you alert and safe, and it doesn't understand that this is not in your benefit. And I agree very much that don't cancel, go. Don't cancel trips just because that might happen. And as much as can become detached from whether you sleep or not, the better it will be. So if you have whatever plans you have during the day, keep them. And as hard as it is, if you can go into the night almost not planning not to sleep, but not caring. And I know that sounds really impossible. But for me, what that would look like is setting things up in advance that I'm enjoyable things that I could do during the night if I'm really having trouble, and knowing, okay, I'm bringing a book along, or maybe this is a show on Netflix I might want to watch if I'm up all night. Things like that could be an option just to make sure that you can still have an enjoyable time even if you're awake. One other trick that I used to do is I used to bring my own pillow with me. And it was like this weird subconscious, like tricking my brain a little bit to think that there's like, no, I'm at home, because the pillow is going to be associated with your home. So sometimes that would really help for me. And again, I think it's a really subconscious thing, just making your brain feel a little bit more at ease. So that can be a good trick. So bring your pillow if you can, and then completely see how much you can detach from caring, and just keep traveling, keep going, keep following through with your plans, just like Daniel said. And I think eventually you will have more and more success sleeping outside of your home.
100%. And I love that little pillow insight. And I think, yeah, before we can move on to the next one, I would say, Judy, I think it sounds like you're on the right path. You're going to do really well. 100%. And thanks for the question, by the way, Judy. Okay, so now, George, let's read this one. Hello, sleep coach. I'm 25 years old, and on December 3rd, I experienced a night where I couldn't sleep because I read about fatal insomnia on the internet. I slept at last, but after a big try. And after that, I couldn't sleep well on the other day too. From then till now, I always have disrupted sleep. I sleep 8 to 9 hours, but I catch myself waking 4 to 10 times every day. Sometimes I don't even know if I slept or not, but I guess I did. I usually sleep better the first hours, like 3 to 4 hours without waking up. Then I wake up every hour, every 1.5 hours, or even less. I feel rested during the day. I guess I have energy, but I'm afraid of fatal insomnia or REM behavior disorder because in the last days, I woke up from a dream where I was punching an enemy, and I think I punched my bed, not hard though. From December till now, I feel scared that I may have something bad. So yeah, if I go over kind of my thoughts there again, I want to say, George, this is so common and so unfortunate, really, that when you have trouble sleeping at one point, you go online and you hear about sporadic fatal insomnia, and of course you're already triggered, you're already scared, and then you hear about this, and you become going to have more trouble sleeping. So I'm sure you know that this is extremely rare, which is good to know, but it can almost backfire because you think it's so super rare, but then your brain is always like, but what if it's you? Like, what if I have it? Like, so sometimes going in the direction of proving the brain that it's wrong by kind of fact can help, but sometimes if you try, like, it can't be me, then it almost gets more sticky, like we just talked about. So I think one thing that can be really helpful here is that you have insight, George. You see that you've already pointed out that you are anxious, you are fearful, and just imagine, like, it is really, insomnia is always driven by anxiety. It really always is a fear that's driving it. So I think one thing that's important to know is that there's no surprise that you're not sleeping well right now because of the fear and nothing else. The fear in itself can explain everything, and the fact that. And now, on a positive note here, you're still sleeping a good amount of time, which to me tells me that, yes, there is some fear that's keeping you up and you have some struggle, but, you don't have that strong fear that keeps you up all night. So, you're still in a point where I think shifting in another direction will not be as difficult for you as it is for someone like Michelle, for example, who struggled for so many years. So I think, if I just kind of sum this up, I want to say, George, that just understanding that fear really is what causes trouble sleeping. And then just, you said somewhere like it was with a big try. I just want to spend some time here then say, like, sleeping well never comes from a big try. So even when you think that it was because you tried so hard, it was actually because you were not trying that much. If you had really, 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 really tried to sleep, you would have not slept. So the fact that you slept is actually evidence that you didn't try that hard. And that is the key. The more you go towards, I'm going to actually try less, I'm probably not going to research anymore, I'm going to see that fear is what drives insomnia. And I'm going to see that even that time when I slept well, that was because I didn't try that hard. That, I think, is the path forward those are my kind of immediate thoughts here. And so over to you, Michelle. What are your thoughts when you read this?
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, but with sporadic fatal insomnia, I believe that the symptoms are quite different. I'm not an expert on this issue, but they typically don't have the typical insomnia pattern of anxiety and rumination and fear about sleep. They typically have other symptoms. It could be headaches, dizziness. Now, again, I'm not an expert on this topic. From the little that I know, it's just really different. So typically, if you're really stressed out and you're really worried and you're catching yourself in that fear, it's much more likely to be hyperarousal than it is to be sporadic fatal insomnia. And maybe Daniel, you can kind of confirm if that's the case.
Yeah, I can just kind of jump in, but you're on a very, I think you're on
Yeah.
the most helpful track here, which is what I want to say is that anxiety is in itself just like evidence that it's not a neurodegenerative disease,
That's
that's
exactly
it.
what I wanted to say. Like that, you've just summed it up perfectly. Like the fact that you're having the fear and the anxiety, you can rest assured that that's the issue, and that is more than enough. Like absolutely, that was enough to keep me not sleeping for 5 years. So it's good that you seem to be aware of it. So that's certainly positive. So maybe just having that bit of education piece of understanding that typically those with sporadic fatal insomnia are not having the anxiety and the fear and the rumination that insomniacs tend to have can be helpful for him to know. And then I would say, kind of coming back to some of those mindfulness practices that we were talking about before might be beneficial. Just kind of sitting down and allowing a lot of those thoughts and fears to come up, and to see if you can drop into that observer role with yourself, to start to witness your thoughts, create a bit of space and distance between you and your thoughts. Like remind yourself again that you're the observer of your thoughts, not your thoughts, and that you get to choose how you respond to your thoughts as well. You may have the thought that you should immediately go get tested for this issue, but you don't have to act on that necessarily, right? Like it's a thought, not a fact. So just, I would start doing some of these mindfulness practices and allowing those thoughts to really come forward, and allowing all the feelings behind them to come forward, and allowing yourself to feel all of it. And that's what I would
Yeah,
do first.
that's super helpful. And he asked about a little bit another thing that's called REM behavioral disorder, which I'll just say that whenever anybody on this channel, like nothing here is medical advice, anybody concerned about your health, of course, talk to your doctor. But the same thing applies there. This is a condition where people like act out their dreams, which is the same thing there. It is not something that gives you anxiety. It's not something that makes you wonder, why am I not sleeping? Could it be this? Could it be that? I have to Google it. I mean, this. So it's the same thing there. Like REM behavior disorder is a real thing, but when you have it, it doesn't produce anxiety. So that's a very big clue in itself.
I was going to add, I totally understand why he would feel this way, because for me, for years, as I mentioned before, I was convinced it had to be physical because the symptoms were so severe and so unrelenting. And there wasn't any part of me that thought, oh, it's anxiety. I didn't think anxiety could be that powerful. And I would really encourage him to learn more about hyperarousal, because, that is certainly enough to create years and years worth of insomnia. And it's tempting to think it's something physical because it can feel really severe and really scary. But understanding hyperarousal really helps.
100%. Yeah, George, read about hyperarousal. Absolutely, that will be super helpful. Very cool. And so we have a last message, a little bit longer, not too long though, but a little longer. So this is Niqua. So this is actually somebody who signed up for my app, BedTyme, but just did the free trial. And I remember Niqua, she did really well, and I think decided, not to pursue like the full course, if you will. But that's a little background. So let's read this together. Hey, Daniel. Not sure if you remember me, Niqua, from the free trial on your app, but I still haven't conquered insomnia and really haven't made much progress on the hours I sleep from December when we last talked until now. I did give up on CBTi since I'm doing it on my own, got lost and was discouraged, but now I have started back, and I'm in a week and dedicated to see if I can be another success story. It seems I can only average 5 hours of sleep, all 5 hours. Most of the time I'm out 5 hours straight, then wake up and simply can't go back to bed. I was wondering, as time goes by, if my sleep window, 12:30 to 6, will I begin to at least get another hour? When I wake, it is usually at my alarm or right before, so I get out of bed since it's the end of my sleep window, but I would love to be able to get at least 6 hours of sleep. advice on what to do. Really wish I could afford your course as you are awesome. Thank you. I recommended so many of my night owl friends to you. I read your book and need to reread it. Maybe this will help with sleep confidence and anxiety around it. I just want to be less of a zombie, but can't get past that fifth hour. So absolutely, Niqua, I remember you very well. And I'll start off by saying a few things, and then we'll have Michelle here sharing her thoughts. Also, super helpful to have you here, Michelle, by the way. Okay, there's the tricky thing here is that, okay, CBTi, there's some things that are really helpful about it and some things that I don't think are very helpful. So the helpful thing is the education that you learn about, like, why insomnia happens, and that can really help. But the problem is that there's so much focus on these behavioral things, like the sleep window is this much. When you achieved 85% sleep efficiency, you do this, you don't do this, get out of bed, 20 minutes, blah, 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 blah. Which honestly, almost always, like sometimes that honestly, I don't think ever helps. The education can help. And yes, the behavior change of kind of maybe spending less time in bed can be kind of a jolt. It's like different, so it can change. But when you go in the direction that you're going, Niqua, that's when it gets tricky. When like sleeping 6 hours becomes a goal, then that is not helpful, because again, the more you try to sleep, the more you want to sleep, the less you're going to sleep. And when you approach that sleep window as a tool to kind of make you sleep more, it will actually not help you at all. It'll do the opposite. So the way I have kind of reframed this is I ask people who are kind of starting to work with me to think of it as a like a timeless sleep window, where you're like, yeah, it's good to get up about the same time every morning, but then maybe give yourself like maybe something generous, like 7 or 8 hours, and whereby you don't check the time and do what you feel. Don't know what time it is, and move away from knowing how much you sleep. All that monitoring is making you more hyper aroused. So when you move towards like, I don't know what time it is, and if I feel like sleep is going to happen, I allow that to happen. But if I don't feel sleepy, I just do something that I like to do. And it's so counterintuitive, because when you have a problem, you want to try to control it. That's human nature. But it is the desire for control that is keeping you from sleeping well. So when you don't know the time, you don't know how much you slept, you don't monitor that, when you let go of control like that, sleep happens to you. So that was kind of the main things. And we should maybe talk about how you feel like a zombie during the day too. But that was kind of the main things, Niqua. And I think you'll do really well actually when you implement this. I can already, just from your message, it's you can read from your message, Niqua, that there isn't that strong anxiety and fear in there, which makes me feel like I don't think you will have a very hard path forward. And again, and one more last thing, Michelle, you use the word conquer here, which it's such an important word, because whenever you think that there is an enemy, there's a battle, there's a fight that you have to win, you will have more problems. But when you realize that it's abandoning the fight that is the key, like there is no enemy, there's nothing to fight, there's nothing to conquer, that's the way. So yeah, with that said, Michelle, your thoughts?
To see how much I was nodding through all of that, I couldn't agree more. That's all so true. I guess to start, I agree with your statements about CBTI and some of the challenges there. And I did CBTI myself at some point during my insomnia journey, and it didn't work well for me. It was too rigid, and the sleep restriction and the getting out of bed after 20 minutes if I wasn't sleeping, like those types of rules, actually didn't work well for me personally. They actually increased my anxiety, and it also increased my desire to chase sleep more. Like if I could sleep that 5 hours, I was exactly the same. I would think, okay, great, when am I going to be able to stretch this out to 6, and how quickly can I get that to happen? And so I got caught into the whole chasing sleep thing as well when I was doing CBTI, and that's what it sounds like here as well. And Daniel, you mentioned like that never leads anywhere good, with this idea of chasing sleep. It just adds to the hyperarousal. It just adds to putting sleep on a pedestal and giving it more power and creating more stress. Um, the other thing I thought of here was you're measuring success according to how many hours of sleep that you're getting. And at first, that seems to make sense. But if you really think about it, you cannot control your sleep. So how can you possibly measure success and progress against, the hours that you're getting every night, when you don't have control over that? And so one thing I started doing after learning from Daniel's book and Daniel's channel was I started measuring my success with insomnia completely differently. It had nothing to do with how many hours of sleep I was getting, how many times I woke up, how many vivid dreams I had, all these things. It was, how am I responding to everything that's happening? So, for example, I could have a horrible night by all accounts in terms of not being able to fall asleep, having a lot of twitches and adrenaline rushes, waking up a bunch, and just generally not getting a lot of sleep. But the next morning, if I looked back on that night and said, well, you know what? I was able to stay with all the thoughts and the emotions as they were coming up. I welcomed them, I felt them, I let them go. I um, I did not kind of fall into that trap of kind of panicking about not getting the sleep that I wanted in the moment. So if I could essentially continue to do the practices that I wanted to do with my sleep, which was all these mindfulness practices that we talked about, and welcoming in all these unwelcome thoughts and feelings and sensations throughout the night. So twitches start happening. Instead of getting scared and pushing them away and trying to avoid them, I would welcome them in. So if I could basically have a horrible night, but I was doing all of these practices, I considered it a huge success. I completely shifted it. So the next morning, I would feel really proud of myself, even if I slept 3 or 4 hours. I'm like, man, I welcomed in all those twitches. I welcomed in all those adrenaline rushes, because I knew even if I'm not seeing the progress right now in terms of actual sleep, I knew that I was working on retraining my brain. I knew I was working on reducing hypoarousal, and that all of this stuff takes time. And I just had to start measuring success differently. So that's what I would encourage
Yeah.
her to do, is to start measuring success according to things that are actually in your power, which is how you are emotionally and mentally responding to everything that's happening during the night and during the day, as opposed to hours of sleep, and especially as opposed to chasing sleep or trying to conquer your insomnia or sleep in any single way.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I had another guest, his name was Matt, and I called that episode like success is, enjoying life again. Like it really is,
Yeah, I love that. That's exactly it. And just to add to that thought, because you just said it and it just triggered a thought around that, was if I had I don't like saying bad night, because again, if you can really do certain, like stay with it and practice a lot of this stuff, it doesn't have to be bad. But if I would have a really sleepless night, but then I would have a really great day. There were times where my day was great, even though I got hardly any sleep at all. That was a success. So measuring success by everything that's actually in your power, by going and having a great day at work, by seeing friends, by following through with everything that you were going to do that day. It's not only excuse me, empowering, but it's a great way to measure your success through all this. And before you know it, your sleep will improve, and hopefully you won't even know by how much, because you won't be tracking those hours.
Exactly.
You'll just have a general sense that, oh gosh, I'm not thinking about that as much. And I think I'm a little bit more rested. And it's kind of it's blurry, but you kind of fight that instinct to put like numbers and exact figures and tracking to it. And so yeah, definitely living your life during the day is another way to measure success as well.
And then I see we have like two, I think, the live comments here. But it's from Michael actually. Michael is here. Thanks for sharing your story, Michelle.
Oh, thanks, Michael.
What do you say? Oh, here's another Michael. Woke up. Actually, sorry, Michael. Let me just finish the one last thought from Niqua, which was, Niqua said she felt like a zombie during the day. I just want to say that really also comes from the struggle, trying to conquer and win and combat and measure and things like that. So everything gets better when you abandon that struggle, even like how you feel during the day.
Yes.
So Michael says, woke up twice last night and put on some of your videos from yesterday and was back asleep both times within a few minutes. Awesome. Very glad to hear that. Very glad to hear.
That's great.
So yeah, we'll say I want to say Michelle, it was super, super nice of you to come back and share this. And I think this really, I really sense that this is super helpful. I'm going to ask, now that you've been like the what do you call it, like the guinea pig here, I'll have other people like yourself in. Yeah.
Yeah, anytime. Thanks for having me back. It was fun.
All right. Take care now.
You too. Thanks.